I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You dare once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And as you know, this is Trish Wood is Critical. I have a lot of things to report for you today, things that may change a little bit the way you view the world, which is not a bad thing, considering how grotesque many of them are right now. But the most fun thing I have to say is that my guest is the one, the only CJ Hopkins, who is one of my favorite guests of all time. He has been ahead of the curve on everything, and to boot, is one of the best writers out there, essaying this crazy, crazy time that we're living through. And I admire him very much. I am an unmitigated fangirl of his work, and I read it to stay as sane as I'm ever going to be given the circumstances. So he's worth dipping into. Here's how you can find him. He's an award-winning playwright, novelist, and political satirist. His plays have been produced and have been toured at theaters and festivals, including Riverside Studios in London, in New York, in Edinburgh, in Sydney, in Toronto, in Los Angeles, Atlanta, etc. On and on. His writing awards include the 2002 First of the Scotsman Fringe Firsts. His political satire and commentary has been published by Consent Factory, which is his website, Off Guardian, Zero Hedge, Cold Type, Rubicon, RT.com, Counterpunch, Dissident Voice, and many other publications, and has been widely translated. His dystopian science fiction novel, Zone 23, is published by Snogsworthy, Swain, and Cormorant. And he's also written a whole bunch of books about the terrible state we find ourselves in right now. He's been following what he calls the emergence of Globocap and the new tyranny for way longer, like preceding actually COVID-19. So he brings a depth and also an artist's eye to the discussion that is really, really needed. And he has some negative things to say about Matthias Desmet, which is interesting. So I had to kind of sit and listen and take in something I didn't necessarily agree with, but I did shift a bit after hearing him out. He talks about the Twitter files, but more importantly, he talks about how we are going to get through the rest of this. The thing we fear has already happened, people. And so we have to start looking at it somewhat differently. And voices like CJ, one of the dissident voices, which I understand I am now too, which I never saw myself that way. Here I am, this old woman, virtually old woman, living in a conservative neighborhood. And I feel like I'm in the French underground right now, because I'm so opposed to most of the stuff that's going on in the world right now. And so is CJ. So stick around for him. It will be very, very much a game changer for you, if not even a life changer. And I beg of you to also read some of the wonderful things that he's been writing. This is going to be my last show for a week or so. And generally speaking, I'll just say to you, as I said to CJ, I'm burned out. I've been doing this for a long time without relief. I think I've only missed one show for COVID, and I did one. I've done two with COVID now. But the COVID's nothing. The COVID we defeat, don't we? Even us unvaccinated schmoes defeat COVID. It has just been the relentless pushback and cognitive dissonance and bullshittery on behalf of the legacy media and many people around me that it's just ground me down a bit. No one's perfect. We all have a bit of a breaking point, people. And I'm a person who, coming from the old school journalism world where you just keep pushing on through, right? Until you get to where you are going. But I realized recently that there is nowhere we're going with this. This is going to be an ongoing battle for years and years and years. It's not like they're going to say, "Oh, we blew it on COVID. We were literally killing people with bad COVID public health policy. We're going to apologize and never do that again." That is not going to happen, and you can tell it's not going to happen by their response to the COVID Twitter files. Right? They're rewriting everything. I mean, the information war is lost, right? Which is why people like CJ and others doing podcasts like mine, I will humbly say me a little bit, I hope, are becoming more important in really being the bulwark against a total takeover of the insanity. And I know that you guys get it. Most of the people around me think I'm insane for saying things like that, but do understand who I am. I came from legacy media. I was the Mike Wallace of the Fifth Estate for 10 years, right? Award-winning, hardworking, worked with a team of excellent journalists. Before that, Fifth Estate covered Tony Fauci back in the day, amongst other things, did a lot of pharmaceutical products liability where they were cheating and lying on people and killing people, exposed that, got a guilty or a not guilty man out of prison by sheer force of the research we'd done and the belief in what we were doing. That is old school journalism. That's what I did. So I'm not a wingnut. I'm not slow to the party here. And I was in March of 2022, as many of you know. Now I've said it, it's in my Substack. I sent a memo out to one of the reporters at Reason Magazine and warned him about what was coming and said, please send this around to the American media. Never heard back. I assume that didn't happen because I'm Canadian and not famous, right? So even though that letter is correct and everything it said and stands the test of time, it was not circulated. So I that is what caused the formation of this podcast, which I love and which has given me the opportunity to meet many of you in places like Bedeck and at the Canadian COVID Care Alliance hearings, and also here for the Ideas Institute. I love meeting you all, and I know how valuable this kind of dialogue can be. So I'm not abandoning you, but I am taking a little bit of time off. We're going to run a show next week. It just won't be new. And when you hear the show we're rerunning, you'll be happy about it, I hope. So that's where I'm trying to really explain where I am. It's just been a hard slog, and you know, like I was saying, if you do a big investigative show for Fifth Estate, it runs at a certain type and then a certain day and then it ends, right? It's over and you move on. There's no moving on from this. So all of us, and CJ included, are breaking in the ways that we can break just to regroup and go for a walk in the woods, smell a flower, kiss our pets, go back to church, which I will do. I always feel uplifted, pull in some more AA meetings if I can find one that's not a mask event, and I will be refreshed, but I really, really need it or I'm going to go bonkers. So I hope you appreciate and understand that because I love you all for supporting me. Speaking about old school journalists, I want to talk to you a bit about my friend Nate Thayer, who died a couple of days ago. You probably don't know who he is, but he was deservedly a legend in the world of foreign correspondence. I say friend of mine. He was a friend, but he was more of an acquaintance. We didn't hang out together because you couldn't really hang out with Nate. Nate was a desperately, desperately sick alcoholic, but was also a wonderful human being in many ways and actually had the scoop of the century. He literally got the scoop of the century. I was sitting in my office and I got a phone call from my very close girlfriend who was one of his producers in Bangkok, Thailand. And she said, we've got a big scoop and we got to sell it to somebody over there. Who would you suggest? And she told me what the scoop was. And I nearly fell off my chair. Nate Thayer had found and recorded what turned out to be the final interview in the jungles of Cambodia with Pol Pot. Imagine that. Imagine that. What a scoop. Here is how that was described. I'm just going to read you something that was printed after he died. Nate Thayer, a fearless reporter who survived several brushes with death over decades covering conflict in Southeast Asia, and was the last Western journalist to interview Pol Pot, the leader of the murderous Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, has died. Thayer was found dead at his Falmouth, Massachusetts home on Tuesday by a friend. His brother, Rob Thayer, said Thursday he was 62. He had been suffering with multiple ailments for several months, and the cause of death was listed as natural causes. It was actually alcoholism, but Rob Thayer said, adding that he had last spent time with his brother on Sunday. Thayer at various times worked for the Associated Press, Jane's Defense Weekly, the Phnom Penh Post, the Washington Post, Agence France Presse, and Soldier of Fortune magazine, but it was while working as a correspondent for the Hong Kong based Far Eastern Economic Review that he scored the Pol Pot interview published in October of 1997. It was the reclusive leader's first interview in 20 years and last, it turns out. So that was those are the accolades for Nate, but I feel I need to speak somewhat truthfully about him because we share a common affliction, as do many people in my family, which is alcoholism. So here's what his friends are saying. Many of them Australian, because there's a lot of Aussies covering Southeast Asia out of Bangkok, where my friend was set up with her production company. Sure, I knew him well. I'd lived in Bangkok 1989 to 91 before basing in Phnom Penh as Reuters bureau chief from 91 to 95. Nate and I worked and played hard, and we were in good company. And now, like Stefan, Ira, Paigey, and Serge, all once part of the old Cambo push, he is no longer with us, and that is sad, and we're upset and struggling to make sense of his untimely passing. But I'll argue any honest appraisal of Nate has to look at the complete person. It's what he would want. Sage for the legendary Lamont, that was his dog, he died alone, impoverished, and there is no delicate way to put it. He drank himself to death. And here lies the real tragedy of a sublimely gifted journalist who at one time scooped the world, made a fortune, and blew the lot. I'd argue he didn't handle fame well, yet secretly craved it, his tobacco spitting bravado masking nagging insecurities, which would plunge him into deep depression and bitterness. He goes on to say that Nate was a physically gifted champion swimmer, many, many other very good qualities. But that's as good a summary as Nate as I've read in these past few days while he's being lionized in the press. And I'll just share with you a quick story I have of Nate and my connection to him. I met him a bunch of times, but the last time I saw him, he'd bought this kind of antebellum mansion down on the waterfront in Maryland. And my friend and I went down there together to visit him. We flew to Baltimore and then rented a car and drove out to this lovely old house where Nate was holed up and I guess just burning through the nearly $1 million he got for the Pol Pot scoop, which he was betrayed over, by the way, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so he was in this lovely old house that was kind of falling to ruin, wasn't very clean, but he was a lovely host to she and I. And we had a lot of fun with him there, but I could see that although he was very handsome, dashing even in some ways, um, he was a wreck of a guy who couldn't stop drinking. And I know that kind of guy, the kind of guy that Nate is. We see them in the rooms of AA and elsewhere, these kind of handsome, very skilled at something, seemingly ridiculously confident, but they can never seem to get sober. And when they drink, they really drink and all hell breaks loose, right? Wives are lost, fortunes are lost, children are lost, careers are lost. It's just ruination. And Nate was one of those drinkers and he could never ever sort it out. So later when I think I wasn't sober then, I'm not sure. I can't remember if I'd gotten sober, but I did make a couple of attempts, as did his other friends, to get him to, take the cure, but he could never ever do it, and he spiraled down. But the catalyst for Nate was that when he got this footage of Pol Pot, He sold it to ABC through Ted Koppel. And there were many clauses, and one of them was that the story was a scoop. It was his scoop. It was supposed to stay his scoop. And somehow, still frames, pictures of Pol Pot, whom nobody had seen in decades, were either leaked or given to the newspapers. I think they were given to the newspapers for an ID, and robbed Nate of his scoop, right? And there were some other issues involved too, lawsuits, etc. He actually turned down a Peabody Award. And those things are troubling. He had what I call in really great journalists an overdeveloped sense of right and wrong. And that can make you terrific at reporting out and supporting a difficult story. But when you apply that to your own life as a human being, it doesn't work for us. It's kind of what AA teaches us too. You just can't be mad at people all the time. And Nate sort of was. So, yes, I think ABC screwed him over. I think it was awful what happened. But he could have accepted the Peabody. He should have maybe not spent so much time suing people, but this is me second guessing. That's just who Nate was. And so he kind of ended his life in obscurity and penury after this illustrious career, and died alone, as his friend said, with only his dog Lamont by his side. So there is some kind of a story in here, and I'm going to write about this for my Substack. I'll see if I can dig out some old pictures. But let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about Nate Thayer. He is the last of the really good reporters, tracking Pol Pot through the jungle for years. I mean, he was blown up multiple times in the jungle. He had to make friends with these with the rebels, the Khmer Rouge rebels. I mean, it was wild. He was very, very brave. Um, and it's amazing that he survived any of it. I know that there was I think some brain damage. I think he was in a vehicle that rolled over an explosive, and there's a photograph of him blown up, and people were blown up and died. And um, here is how he describes getting to Pol Pot. After a series of furtive rendezvous using coded messages over mobile phones, I slipped into one of the most impenetrable, malaria-ridden, and landmine-strewn jungles of the world. Khmer Rouge-controlled northern Cambodia, Thayer wrote. Pol Pot, an anguished old man, frail and struggling to maintain his dignity, was watching his life vision crumble in utter final defeat, he wrote. So it was an extraordinary scoop, and he paid a price physically and mentally for being a really good reporter. And some people say that his pernicious alcoholism was caused by how hard his job was. And I can buy into that. But I will also tell you that journalism compels people with those predilections into the business anyway. Maybe it makes it worse, but a lot of people who go into journalism are troubled, and maybe budding alcoholics too. I know I was. And seeing the stuff we see obviously makes it worse, but I wonder how much of that maybe was already in him waiting to explode with the right catalyst of the things he saw. And I know he had malaria many times and brain damage from the explosion, all sorts of things. So anyway, that's Nate Thayer. He's brilliant. I hope somebody finds the book he was working on, and it was called Sympathy for the Devil, and publishes it. Somebody should make a scripted drama about this guy. Um, and if they do, I hope they capture how charismatic and also how kind he was. He was a very, very kind individual. And we should remember him that way, not the way he was in his final years, being a little bit of a jerk. But we won't. We'll just forget that part. Okay. Let's do my pitch. Um, there are multiple ways you can support us here at Trish Wood is Critical, through either Patreon or PayPal or my Substack, which is the best place because it is a free speech place. And you'll also get my writing as well, my Substack. I try to do one a week. I missed a week because I had COVID. I tried, but forget it. So I just wrote about my COVID, which people seem to like. especially for an unvaccinated person of a certain age. They want to know the details, so I was happy to share. So you can join on Substack. I'd be grateful for that. Everybody who works for me gets paid here, people. I'm not using interns, so and I pay a producer and for the equipment and all that sort of thing. So I'd be very, very grateful. It helps us go on, and it if you do a monthly contribution, then I don't have to worry too much. And we have a really fun merch store that's coming your way. You can find all kinds of wonderful hats and things that express some of the tenets of the way we think now, including the no hat, which is good. It's a good all occasion hat. You can even take it dating. Young women could take it dating if they didn't want to actually have to utter those words. So um, please, you can support us by also shopping through our merch store, and I would be grateful for that. There is a story that Jordan Peterson is being called to account by the college that regulates psychology licenses because of his social media feeds and some of the positions he has taken, which has the death knell ring of a re-education camp. I mean, these professional associations have really revealed who and what they are during COVID-19. I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson says. I don't agree with everything anybody says. But he says some really smart stuff. And I think he's helped a lot of troubled young men, too. And even if he hadn't done those things, this would still be wrong. And what I understand from watching Michaela, his daughter's podcast, is that if they don't like his jib or if he refuses to take whatever this stupid course is, to re-educate him about how to do social media and communicate. Can you imagine? He's one of the best communicators in the world. It's just, but he's had complaints, in the society we live in where the other side is always complaining about something. It's just, they are ridiculous. They can't argue on a street full of ideas. They have to take pot shots by canceling people and re-educating them. It is disgusting. It is disgusting. And I support wholeheartedly Dr. Jordan Peterson on this issue. Do I ever? So, what we're going to run in place of a new show is we're going to run the show I did with Dr. Francis Christian, the surgeon from Saskatchewan, who was canceled for daring to question whether or not giving the COVID vaccine to children was a good idea. He got um, erased for that. And the position he took then, which was quite mild actually, has now been adopted by many countries around the world. So the smart people who figure it out first and are ahead of their time, instead of being praised in our culture, now they get canceled for it. And that's what happened to Dr. Christian. But he's no fool because he taped the meeting he had when he was let go. And in that meeting, there is an exchange between himself and one of the people disciplining him, in which she suggests that he needs psychological help because he's questioning the vaccine, or that's the assumption from what she says. Imagine that. So it's kind of the same thing now, right? That if you question the narrative, if you want to make your own choice, if you're a doctor and you're not governing rigidly to the guidelines, you need to be re-educated. You need to be punished. There even was a story going around that said to family doctors that if a patient of yours doesn't want the vaccine, you should ask them if they want to take um, a, uh, a drug, an antidepressant drug, right? Like there's something wrong with people. I mean, what is going on here, folks? We cannot have this. We've got to wake up to this. It's crazy. So we're going to play that show for you next week in place of a new show while I am off regrouping and hoping that you'll all have be sending, good vibes for me while I'm doing that. Okay, here is my interview with CJ Hopkins. Sit back, relax, get yourself an espresso or whatever you drink, and just enjoy how terribly, terribly smart CJ is. Hi, CJ. How are you?
I'm doing okay, Trish. How are you?
I'm good. Do you mind? I know you're suffering. We're both suffering, but you're more into it. I'm on my way out of it. Can we talk about that for a minute? One thing I find is that my audience always likes to know what's happening with people because there's so many weird things going around. I announce always that I'm unvaccinated when I get sick so that I'm being honest about what's happening, and don't regret being unvaxxed. It's one of my proudest things. I'm just wondering how you're doing and what you think it is.
What, the bug that I've got?
The bug.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, well, who knows? Sometimes I think about this a lot. It's, we're coming up on 3 years of this madness. And prior to 3 years ago, I was teaching script writing workshops with a lot of different writers from all over the world. My
Yeah.
wife is a yoga teacher, so she spends all day with a bunch of different people, touching their bodies and so on. Basically, we have always caught any bug that was going around Berlin. And the bugs that she didn't catch and bring home to me, I caught them and
Yeah.
brought them home to her. So we're very familiar with getting repeated bugs during the nasty winter in
Yeah.
Berlin. And so if I forget about the last 3 years, this is just kind of a better than normal winter so far. I think this
Yeah.
is this is the first winter bug that we've had, and it's what I call the flu, which is not a classic cold. It comes with body aches and headaches and some gut involvement and stuff like that. But you basically just feel crummy and put you in bed for a few days and then you feel crummy for a while. It's a long way of saying this would be a completely unremarkable occurrence if it weren't for the last 3 years.
Well, I hate this. You know why I hate it? Because look, I agree with you. This would be a totally nothing burger, as they say. But you know what? What it does is it opens up a whole Pandora's box of personal responsibility in the landscape of morality, right? So I got this thing just before Christmas, and I am the person who is the Christmas fanatic. And proudly a Christmas fanatic. And I'm also a Christian, which surprises some people, but I am, and I say so. So it's a big deal for me. And the kids come over. We have 4 grown kids between us, and we kind of go ape shit with decorations and gifts and stuff. And it's really lovely. It's a time of year that actually I feel really joyous about. And so for the first time ever, I had to cancel it because I actually was not well enough to actually do physically what needed to be done. But the bigger issue is, what do we do now? I mean, if you don't test and get a negative result, you can't be part of the world. And if you test and get a positive result, which I did for a couple of days for COVID, you have to withdraw, right? So we now live in a place where there are all of these new social rules that terrify me. Like if I pass someone on the street that I know and then I say, "Oh God, I've got COVID," like they're going to find out I had COVID. And what if they get COVID? And they think, I mean, it's really, really exhausting. Or is that just me being neurotic, which I am, by the way?
Well, again, to be honest, Trish, I try to put myself back in the pre-2020 mindset and think about this. And prior to the spring of 2020, the beginning of 2020, people got sick all the time in the winter, and we all walked around. My wife used to complain about it. She'd come home from being out teaching, come home and say, three people coughed directly in my face without
Yeah.
covering their mouths on the U-Bahn. uh, and you know, and another example, just with what you were mentioning, throughout my life, when I get sick, I stay home.
Yeah.
It's this is prior to COVID, prior to anything. I just figure,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm sick and I'm contagious, there's no reason to go to work or go out and give it to a bunch of other people, and I feel
Of
like
course.
crap, anyway. So let me stay home
Yeah.
until I'm not symptomatic anymore. And to me, this was just sort of common sense and common courtesy. I think because everything has been so successfully pathologized uh, during the last 3 years, that
Yeah.
just normal behavior, the way that we have behaved for decades and hundreds of years, maybe, but at least decades, the way that sensible people, courteous people, have behaved regarding regular winter respiratory viruses has been just blown up into this dystopian, pathologized. I don't know what to call it, but yeah, I think it's madness. I really do. We never. God knows how many bugs I've had over the years. As I said, since I've lived in Berlin. With my wife and both of us teaching, I think on average we had 2 or 3 bugs, at least during the winter season.
Yeah.
And we would, bitch about it and moan and what have you, and life went on, and we didn't feel the need to, test ourselves or, mask ourselves or anything like that. We just behaved like regular, rational human beings, and society survived.
I know it did. I know it did. I'm, listening to you speak. I think maybe the overarching question from me to you at this point, anyway, is aside from the infection, how are you doing? I found after 2.5 years of slogging through this difficult time and being kind of really obsessed with reporting it out and talking about it and pointing it out that I'm sort of burned out, CJ. I don't have much gas left in the tank. And as I'm going to announce on the show today that I think maybe the first time after the first time I had COVID, I'm not going to do a show next week because I desperately, desperately need to regroup. And part of that is I don't want to feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I feel like we do the work, we broadcast the stats, we bring on the experts, we point out the fallacies, and it's still really, really hard to make a dent in what's happening in the world right now. It's really difficult. I'm not complaining. I'm lucky, but that's kind of where I am. I was asking you about you. That was very self-involved, but do please tell me about how you're doing.
Yeah, I will tell you, I've been trying to recuperate. I tried to wrap up. I wrote my year-end column and put it out a little bit early
Yeah.
this year, and my plan was to really spend the whole holiday period recuperating and trying to regather my strength, because I was completely burnt out and
Yeah.
completely exhausted and
I'm sorry.
just
I'm
emotionally. Oh
sorry.
yeah, no, it's to be expected. Thanks, but it's to be expected, and just emotionally beat up as well. I've been talking with friends, and we've been talking about the more personal level of things, um,
Yeah.
and I was just trying to remind them. I mean, those of us who have been fighting this thing, the new normal, whatever you want to call it, from the beginning, and I'm talking, March and April of 2020. We have basically been assaulted on a daily basis
Yeah.
for going on 3 years.
Yeah.
Aside from just the physical stress of the lockdowns and just existing as society was pathologized, the emotional stress. I mean, the just the abuse, the systematic abuse that we have been subjected to, is not to be underestimated. At least I'm not
Mm.
underestimating it. We have been called just every filthy name in the book, and demonized as just the worst type of social uh, miscreants for on a daily basis for well over 2 years. And anyone who thinks that this does not take a toll, an emotional toll, is kidding themselves. It's brutal. The last few columns that I wrote this year were focused on gaslighting. Um,
Yeah.
and gaslighting is a real phenomenon, and anybody who's been in an abusive relationship can testify to it. Uh, in my opinion, basically what what those of us who didn't buy in at all and have been fighting this from day one, what we've experienced is, over 2 years of solid, systematic gaslighting carried out not just by an abusive partner, but by our governments and by the vast majority of the corporate media apparatus, and by the vast majority of our societies. I think I'm going on and on about it. I struggle to articulate what an incredibly powerful and destructive force that is, and the emotional damage that it's done to all of us.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I'm old school. I'm an old school journalist. When I started the podcast, I've said this before, I had to teach myself to use the word I, because in the olden days, reporters never talked about themselves. They weren't supposed to. The story wasn't about us. Who gives a shit what you think? You just get out there and report, and that's what I did. So I've had to learn to speak about myself, mostly because the listeners of this show and I are now really involved, and my sharing my own experience helps people, and I'm happy to do it. But one thing that has um, highlighted the kind of ongoing abuse, especially here in Canada, from our prime minister, and he's egged on by the laptop class, right? He absolutely hates me and people like me and people in blue collar people too. Is the idea that when we meet somewhere, I've done a bunch of public events, and I'm going to actually pursue this in the new year. I've done public events. I did the censorship in medicine conference in Bedeck. God bless Dr. Chris Milburn, who put it on, and Shea Bhattacharya, my friend who showed up, who I love. And I did work for the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. I did work for the Ideas Institute, in which I'm a scholar. And what happens is when these live audiences is people are like, wow, holy shit, I can breathe again. I feel like myself again. I feel like I'm Canadian again, right? There are a lot of tears. There's a lot of, like in Bedeck, Nova Scotia, I was nearly mobbed at that event by people who just wanted to talk to me because it meant that they could say what they were really thinking. And that was a very, very emotional experience for me. But what is happening there is that people get together in groups kind of privately to be who they really are, and the rest of the time we walk around with our mouths taped shut so we don't offend somebody, right? I mean, that's it. And that's been very, 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 very difficult for me. And I don't feel I had a discussion with Tess Laurie, who is a big deal doctor, researcher in the UK. The context was vaccines, and she said, Trish, we're not going to win this fight with data. I mean, clear the vaccines are hurting people. No one can, the data's there. She said, we've already lost that fight, right? We have to find a way to move forward with some hope, given that we have this new information. But I don't see any hope right now. And maybe that's where you are, why we're in the same leaky boat together, psychologically, that I'm not feeling how I can affect change as an information purveyor, because most people are hearing stuff that's bullshit and believing it.
Yeah, I think I hear you, and I don't know about the hope thing. I think maybe I hesitate to tell people what to do, but I think maybe we need to adjust our expectations and adjust our idea of what winning or making a difference or making an impact means. I think what you're doing is really important. I hope what I'm doing is important, and a lot of people have been doing it and are still doing it. And I frankly, I think if we reach the people who are reachable, if we reach them, that is enough. If we can help to kind of maintain this subculture, which is what I believe we are at this point.
Yeah.
If we can help to maintain and feed this subculture of people who have not converted to the new normal, and who are still, thinking rationally and paying attention to actual facts and scientific data. If we can reach those people, this minority, and keep this subculture alive, that is maybe all the victory we get here. I think a lot of us, I say the quote unquote COVID denying, anti-vax extremists, or whatever we're being called these days. Those of us who've been pushing back against this from the beginning, I think a lot of us have felt that in order to win, we need to, wake up the majority of the masses, and have people, stand up and say, okay, I was wrong, and I'm sorry for demonizing you folks, and I see what's going on. I think that's unrealistic. I don't.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't think that we are going to wake up the majority of the masses. That said, I do see some movement. I was just. I just threw a couple of tweets up recently, focused on Tim Robbins, and I just,
Yes.
I really appreciated. I wrote to Tim and thanked him for this. I really appreciated what he did. Tim came out, and he didn't come out and say, whoops, I'm sorry, let's all have amnesty. He came out and said, hey, I did this. I bought into this. I demonized people. I followed all the orders, and I scolded people for not following the orders. And I bought into it, is what he said. And then he described how he changed. He described how he snapped out of it. And he basically,
that's a good way of putting it. Snapped out of it, right?
Yeah,
It's a good, yeah.
And it was a process for him. It was step by step, and he described it all, and he took it up to the point where now he's at a place where he's absolutely opposing and condemning the demonization of people, and so on. And there have been various reactions to that. I've seen some people who are just still so very angry. And they're like, screw Tim, he was after us, and in the beginning, and I don't want to hear from him now. And
that's wrong. I think that's wrong. They shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I don't go that far. I hear that, and that's not my reaction. I am really grateful for what Tim has done and what Tim is doing. So that's not my reaction at all. But at the same time, I know that there are a lot of people who are still so hurt and so angry, and so emotionally brutalized by everything that's happened, that they are not ready to get to a place where they can, appreciate what Tim is doing. And I don't encourage that. I encourage what Tim is doing. I even wrote a little tweet thread and just encouraging everyone, from celebrities down to just regular
Please
people,
speak.
to tell your stories. Tell your stories. If I said, if you bought into this from the beginning, and you have gradually come to your senses and started to see what's really going on, and you've changed, tell your stories, because those are stories that someone like me, I can't tell that story because I never bought into it in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? I have, over the course of these last 3 years, I have alienated 97% of my friends, colleagues, everyone that I knew. I have alienated these people because I was fighting this so hard from the very beginning. People like Tim, and just regular people who were on board with it in the beginning and have made this journey, have opened their eyes, have looked at the actual facts, and who have come around. If they will tell their stories, that is one of the most valuable things that they can do.
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000. I'm going to try and get Tim for the show. I mean, I hope I would love to have him on. And you know why? Because also, well, first of all, I've had a crush on Tim my whole adult life, so I got him kind of a fair bit of slack. But also because politically, before the left went, insane, I was very much aligned with Tim politically, and have now really profoundly changed, obviously, because of what's happened. But it would be wonderful to have him on. And of course, Shawshank. I mean, who doesn't want to speak to Tim Robbins? My favorite movie of all time. So
And
there you
Bob
go. But
Roberts.
and Bob Roberts, yeah, exactly. I know he's great. So I'm going to try. I'm glad you mentioned it because I'll put him on my list and hope that we can find somebody who can hook us up with him and make a pitch for him to appear and explain himself. We had on the show a guy named Joseph Freeman, Dr. Freeman, who's a magnificent ER doc down in Louisiana in a lot of the kind of state-run hospitals that are like not so great, and filled with very sick African American people, many of whom had COVID. And so he had this really horrific experience there at the beginning and was a kind of a COVIDian true believer, and then realized it was like an amazing moment that he was wrong and apologized over it to the people, including the Great Barrington people, for taking the position he had. And he said something really interesting. This is what I love about these kind of reconciliations. He said, I was on the front line seeing a lot of dying people, and I was the last person who should have been weighing in on public health policy because I had a very narrow idea about what the truth was, right? So he was seeing all of these aging, multi-comorbidity people who were the big kind of age stratification, kill sort of deposit for the virus. So he didn't think of it in a stratification way or a public health way when he was going along with the idea that everybody should be locked down in the way they were. But later he realized that was a mistake. So I was very, very uplifted by that. But again, he does this big mea culpa and then nothing. Like, he wasn't on CNN. He wasn't on, like, nobody paid attention to it. It was really, really weird.
Yeah, no, that goes back to what you brought up and what I was getting at before I wandered into the Tim Robbins tangent. It's just what we're up against is so powerful, Trish. If if victory, if our idea of victory depends on the majority of the masses coming around and seeing clearly what has occurred over the last 3 years, we're not going to get there. I mean, we live in a time where we're faced with the most powerful propaganda apparatus that has ever existed in human history, and
Right.
it is extremely good, and it is just unimaginably powerful, and it is working 24/7. And the idea that we are going to counter the power of that machinery when it has been dialed up to 11 and turned loose with a vengeance, it's not going to happen.
But we have to face that's what's happened, right? We have to face this is what's happened. This is no longer a kind of an Alex Jones conspiracy theory. It's actually happened, and people have to fully take on board that it has and behave accordingly, right? I mentioned on my show last week something I'll say to you, and then we'll move on because I want to talk about some of the stuff you've written. It's so important. But that is the idea that I think one way to counter both my depression and the collateral damage of this era in which we live is for people to take back some power. And what I mean by that is, why are we waiting for the government who did this to us to ride to the rescue and save us from the problems they created? That's not going to happen, because if they did that, they'd have to admit they created the problems. They're not going to do that, right? These are policy deaths. These are policy ruinations. These are not, oh, it was caused by COVID. That's bullshit. It was caused by the policies. So we should, I think, I wish, I wish I had a multimillionaire benefactor. Hello, is there anybody out there who wants to help me do this? Because let's do it. What I'm saying is, I want to start, or someone should start, an organization where in communities across this country and yours and America, people in communities say, we are going to rectify what these bastards did. We're going to educate the kids who missed years of school. We're going to help small business owners rebuild what they had and what they lost. We're going to make sure cancer patients are getting the treatment. Like, that's what we're going to do, because there's no cavalry riding to the rescue here. And I feel like if we did that with a lot of autonomy as citizens, it would be very, very powerful, even though for sure they would come for us as right-wing nuts and starting a cult and white supremacists, all the stuff they do. I think we must do that. And it's the only thing that I feel somewhat positive about in the last kind of couple months of really thinking through. I'll speak forever. Bring me out. I'll talk. I never say no to anybody. I speak to anybody no matter what their political viewpoints are, because I want to help. So don't stop asking me to do that. But I think that we need to now focus on the fact that we're going to lose a generation of kids if people like me are not allowed to show up once a week and read to them, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think what's available again, I described us as a subculture,
Yeah.
and I, in a few of my columns towards the end of the year, I think it was in the autumn, I tried to get across the idea that we are deviants, we are social deviants. You know, uh, we are we're dissidents, and we're social deviants. I did a conference, and that really annoyed Catherine Austin Fitz, who I love. And she was, I'm not a deviant. But the reason that the reason that I introduced that concept, it sort of speaks to what you were talking about. Is, again, if those of us who have been pushing back and trying to hold on to reality, if we expect to overcome Globocap and its
Yeah.
and its global propaganda apparatus,
Yeah.
we're going to lose. But the degree to which people can do exactly what you were talking about, reaching out to other people, reaching out to kids in an autonomous, decentralized way. Every single person, every single small group of people that we can connect with and reach out to,
Yeah.
count. All of
Yeah.
this, all of these little steps count,
Yeah.
and they are probably all that we can expect to do. The reason I've been, let me just ramble on just a little bit more,
Sure.
Trish. The reason I've been pushing this idea of a subculture, or seeing ourselves as social deviants. I mean, of course, we don't really see ourselves that way, but that is what we are in the structure of new normal society. And I think we need to face that fact. That is what we are being demonized as. That is how we are being treated. And I think the sooner that we realize that this isn't a mistake, it's not happening by accident. We're being systematically shut out of new normal society, and
Yeah.
stigmatized and demonized as deviants. If we can accept our position on the battlefield, we can develop strategies to do as much as we can.
Yes. And just to springboard off of that, because I completely trust how you think, and it's not a question I would ask most of the guests on this show, but I will ask you. I am getting more and more scared about what the end game is here. And again, at the risk of sounding Alex Jonesy, who is sort of the touchstone for the kind of crazy conspiracy theory, but what they're doing, and when I say they, I mean all of these Western leaders who take a knee to the World Economic Forum in the way that they do. I wish that not participating in that would go on the ballot. And I know that in some places, including here in Alberta, we have people talking about that. And of course, they come for them in a heartbeat with some ridiculous accusations. But what is really going on? What do they want? Do they want to turn us into serfs? Do they feel that they are the chosen demographic who shall fly in their private jets and drive their gas guzzling or oversized electric cars, and we will have nothing? We'll live in hive mind, awful apartment buildings with no cars, and be crunched in together with no quality of life. I mean, I think for me, the overarching sense of what I see here is that our quality of life is being diminished at every turn. Flying in an airplane is a nightmare. City traffic is a nightmare. Finding decent housing is a nightmare. Good food is a nightmare. I mean, you can't, every little thing aside our family and children and if you're religious like me that make life worth living, they're all being diminished. Even Christianity is being diminished.
Mhm.
Are they doing this on purpose because they just all don't give a shit about us and they never did and now they know they can get away with it because the media is complicit? Like, and is this to stop? Have they actually convinced themselves climate change is existential and they've got to cull some of us? I know my listeners are going, "What's wrong with her?" But I honestly, I cannot figure out what the hell is going on here, CJ. What is your best theory of it?
Well, this is exactly what I've been, going on about for. It's actually much longer than the last 3 years. As I started writing my columns back in 2016 when the whole Globocap reaction to Trump began, and the Trump and international populism basically is the populist
Yeah.
backlash. What I've been writing about humorously and sometimes not so humorously, um, Trish, is the I'm going to do my whole spiel again, basically.
Do your spiel. Do your spiel.
Yeah, what I've been trying to get across to people is basically in the early 1990s, after the Soviet Union dissolved, the world changed radically. We became a global capitalist world, a world that is dominated by a single ideology. That was the last, whatever you want to call it, communism, Marxism, what have you. This was the last ideological adversary to global capitalism, and it dissolved and it went away, and we became a single ideology world, a global capitalist world. And what I've been tracking, I think, for the majority of my life, really, in my plays and literary stuff, as well as in my essays, is the evolution of this nascent globally hegemonic system that we live in, that most of us really don't have our heads around yet. Most of us still see the world in terms of competing nation states and what have you. But I see it as a world that is dominated by this globally hegemonic system, which is still relatively young. It's only about 30 years old, which is nothing in historical terms. And if you're a globally hegemonic system, right, and you basically rule the entire territory of the earth, and yes, there are still pockets of resistance, that goes without saying, but you basically, your ideology dominates the entire territory of the earth. You have no outside adversary. There's no
Right.
outside adversary to fight. The only thing that you have left to do is to eliminate internal resistance and try to universalize your ideology and to create ideological uniformity throughout your territory. It's the same thing an occupying force does when it occupies a country, except this time, for the first time in human history, it's a system that is doing this on a global level. And if you look back at the last 30 years or so of history, that's what I see. I see this nascent, globally hegemonic system going around and eliminating pockets of resistance and doing its best to create ideological uniformity. I want to get back to the way that you set me up. It's what I'm trying to get to is totalitarianism. If
Yeah.
you are a globe, what I'm describing is a globally hegemonic system that dominates the entire territory of the earth, that is going about, wiping out little pockets of internal resistance wherever they are, trying to create ideological uniformity. This is a form. This is totalitarianism in a new form that we haven't seen it before. And of course it is. because if you're a globally hegemonic system and you have no external adversaries to fight anymore, there is nothing else to do. There's nothing else to do. And that's what I see is going on. And I think until we come to terms with that, we don't know what we're struggling against. We don't. We're not even aware of what we're fighting against. When you set us up here and you were talking about, are they doing this? Are they doing that? I get into tricky territory here because, of course, there are absolutely individuals and organizations that are executing this, but at the same time, I look at things systemically. You could go in and kill all of those individuals and dismantle all of those organizations, and the organizations would reform tomorrow, and new individuals would fill their roles. What I'm tracking, Trish, is the evolution of this system, and to me, it's a completely logical evolution. And the idea that we are going to stop it seems kind of nuts to me. I think it's a situation where those of us who are pushing back against it have to resist or fight or whatever you want to call it, with based on faith. I don't think we can see
No.
what comes next. I think the most we can
Agreed.
do at this point, is try to understand clearly what we're up against and do whatever is in front of us, wherever we are and whoever we are,
Yes.
to try to shine a light on it and to try to push back against it and fight it however we can. I hope that was clear for your listeners. To get back to the subculture thing that I was talking about, what's happening is, our society has been split. Just a huge rift has been cut into our society. I was tracking this during the Trump years, and
Yeah.
during the last 3 years. During the
Yeah.
last 3 years of the COVID thing, it just went into complete overdrive,
Yeah.
and we're at a point now where society is so split. There are the normals, or the new normals, who sit in front of CNN and nod their heads and whatever MSNBC tells them. Yes, yes, even though it makes absolutely no sense. And these are intelligent people, a lot of whom
Yeah.
were my friends, so I know we're intelligent people.
Same.
But there's this mass, and it's the majority. Let's not kid ourselves, of people who are the normals. And then there's us, and we are the deviants who are not, conforming to the new global ideology. It's our society has been split, and it is not happening by accident. I don't see it as, I don't locate it as coming from a little cabal of individuals who are consciously carrying this out. I think some people are conscious and some are not. I see it as a completely logical evolution of the system that we're actually living under.
And part of what's happening, I believe that this is what COVID really showed. I mean, many things have shown this, but it is that the divide is also very much based on how we see human flourishing and how we see each other. I don't, and on our side, the kind of French beret wearing underground people you describe, the dissidents or whatever, almost to a person, there's a kind of a human decency around them and an expectation of decency and kindness around. And I mean real kindness, not the bumper sticker kind, which is never fucking kind. That be kind bumper sticker, that person with that on their car, avoid them, right? Um, and what I am gravely concerned about is that the majority of people who are participating in this or are swept up in this do not see the danger and cruelty in their own positions. Deny somebody a liver because they're not vaccinated as some punitive measure to show that we do what we're told, that we're obedient. Like but they don't see it that way. I mean, it's just what's happened to them is so profoundly anti-humane, um, that for me, that's the most worrisome part. It makes it harder to reach across to people like that because they think that they are morally superior by supporting Ukraine and denying people transplants, but they're actually the opposite of that, and I don't know how we ever bridge it. And I will also say this, that unless we start growing our numbers more quickly, people will start peeling off and just say, "Fuck it, I can't do it. I'm going to go along. It's too hard." It's too hard to sit at dinner with people who you love and not say what you think, or listen to something that's complete bullshit and that you could knock down with two statistics in a 30-second response. But you can't do it because you don't want to go there and they're not going to listen anyway. And what's the point? Like, this is when you say we're worn down, man. We are worn down right now. And I'm never this uh, pessimistic with my listeners as we are today, but that's kind of how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, it's tough, and we are gonna we are going to lose some people. I mean, that's what this machine is designed to do. The machine is designed to beat us down and wear us out and exhaust us, and to not stop. I mean, we're going into it's 2023, right? We're going into what, the third year of this, the fourth.
Yeah.
I can't keep it straight anymore, and it's still going. It's another thing. I see this online, and and also just in life, in general. So many people are operating. People on either side of the divide are operating under the idea that it's over. It's over now. And we look back, and everyone's writing about it in the past tense, and it's not over. It's ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are still, yes, a lot of the restrictions have been removed, and a lot of the mass hysteria has been dialed down. But there are still plenty of restrictions in place, and we've reached a part of the process where the shock and awe phase has accomplished its mission,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the Orwellian history, of the last 2.5, 3 years, is being cemented into place, and it is not becoming easier to affirm the truth of what happened historically over the. It's becoming harder,
Yeah.
um, and the pressure upon us to abandon the history that we experience, abandon our own experiences, abandon everything that we have known for the past 2 and 3 years. That pressure is increasing. It's not diminishing. It's one of the reasons I recently. I think I put it in a Substack post or something back in March and April of 2020, when the shock and awe campaign was just beginning and the new normal was just being rolled out for the first time. I compiled. I'm sorry if those sirens are
They're
interfering with.
coming to get you. They're coming to
Yeah.
get you. They're at your front door with
Yeah.
batons.
Oh, no, they've moved. They've moved on. They're coming to get the next guy. Um, Back in March and April of 2020, when it was first starting, I started compiling headlines. These were just headlines from corporate media, mainstream media, and they turned into a 157 tweet thread. Compiled during March and April of 2020. And if you go back and look at it, and I just republished it so people could go back and look at it. If you go back and look at it, you 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 can see the intensity with which the initial shock and awe campaign was rolled out, and it was all there. All of the elements were there. The forced masking, the forced vaccinations, the lockdowns, the whole package was rolled out in those first 6 weeks or so, and it was rolled out with just such an intensity of fear and power. And I encourage people to go back and look at it, because that is the history that is disappearing. That history is being rewritten right now, and it's being
I
rewritten.
will Substack that out with a link to you as well, so people can find it easily.
Excellent. The history is being rewritten for a variety of reasons. It's being rewritten intentionally, by the powers that be, because that's that's the goal. It's also being written by so many individuals, and it's being rewritten by people who aren't even conscious that they're rewriting it, just because we're so exhausted and we're so beaten down and we're so tired of fighting. And
Yeah.
people are starting to say, okay, yeah, it was, people made mistakes, right? People,
I hate that.
it was people, everybody, they made mistakes, and they didn't really mean. If you go back and look at how the whole new normal was rolled out during those first 6 to 8 weeks, you can see it. It was not it was not a mistake.
It was not a mistake, and I'll tell you something, and this sounds like I'm bragging on myself. In March of 2020, I sent a letter to a very senior writer for, I'll name the magazine, Reason Magazine, because I
Mm,
thought that he was wrongly a person who was thinking critically about the world, right? In the letter, I said, look, I used to cover Tony Fauci. I have limited respect for him. Here's how he screwed up AIDS and HIV, and here's how he's going to screw up COVID-19. Lockdowns are unnecessary. The stratification of risk proves that. He's not talking about that. They've got the infection fatality rate wrong. It's a whole, I was right about everything. I'm not bragging. You don't have to be Carl Sagan to figure out that these guys were way off base from the get-go, right? And all I said to him was, I won't name him because I don't do that, but all I said to him was, please just send this around to a few people. Don't agree with me or believe me, but here is a little document, send it around to everybody. I never heard anything from him, nothing at all. But when you look back at that document now, it is shocking at how prescient it was and is, and how little science background I actually had to be able to do those things. There were famous epidemiologists shouting from the rooftops and saying, you people are nuts. We don't need to do this, right?
yeah. Yes.
But Fauci wanted to create the false impression of consensus.
Yeah.
And so
And
all of the good people were either censored or smeared or taken to the woodshed, whatever, and they got what they wanted. But it wasn't because they made a mistake. They were being told from day one they were made a mistake by people as imbecilic about science as me, who happen to have been right. So that is not going to fly at all. At all.
and 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 yes, Fauci, but not just Fauci. I think one thing that's kind of dangerous for us. It's something that's happening now, and it kind of gets us into the Twitter files. I've been
Yeah.
crit,
We've
I've
got to
been
talk
critical.
about that.
I've been critical
I
of
know.
the way the Twitter files have been handled. Part of one of the dangers is, and it's, again, this is a natural thing for people to do, is we start finding the bad guys, the individual
Yeah.
bad guys, and
Yeah.
we lose sight of the fact that the new normal was rolled out globally, and it was rolled out systematically. Yes, it was Fauci, and yes, it was the whoever the German minister of health was at that time, and yes, it was what's his face in the UK. From the Imperial College or what have you. Yes, it
Oh,
was.
Neil Ferguson and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Jeremy Ferrari. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Drosten here in
Yes.
Berlin.
Yes. Trostin. What a
Yes,
nightmare.
yes, yes. It was all these individuals, but these individuals, they didn't all get together on Klaus Schwab's yacht and decide how to execute this. This was a globally systemic operation, and it
Yeah.
was and it was rolled out massively in every country that matters, to Globocap, all at once in the course of 6 to 8 weeks. One thing, one thing that I keep urging people to do, and I urged Matt and Barry Weiss and the Twitter Files people to do when they're rolling out the so-called COVID Twitter files. The COVID Twitter files really they don't amount to much, and they're not going to amount to much if people don't go back and look at, for example, Trish, that famous photo, that infamous photo that was rolled out in January of 2020 of the people lying dead in the streets in China,
Yeah.
right? Where did that photo come from? And how did that photo suddenly appear in every Western paper of record all over the world? And it's obviously at this point it's a staged photo. It was a staged photo.
Yeah.
People were not keeling over dead in the streets, in China because of COVID. Shortly after that photo, the headline ran in papers all over the world. Death rate 3.4%. And
I know.
I and I
Yeah.
documented this, and
Yeah. Yep.
other
Yep.
people
Good.
have
Good.
as
Good.
well. And people forget, but this was rolled out immediately. It was in March of 2020. Death rate 3.4%. This fear campaign, this shock and awe campaign, was globally systemic, and it was rolled out everywhere all at once. If we don't go back to the actual history and ask the questions, where did this come from? How did this
Yeah.
happen?
You're right. You're 1,000% right. And that is
We're
old school journalism.
yeah,
It is. And I bang on about this on the show all the time. Timelines, right? What
yes,
happened to make this happen? And I'm actually involved in a project right now that's doing some investigative work on that. I think you're 1,000% right. Those photos were insane. And they were followed up by a whole bunch of bots saying how terrible the Americans are for not locking down. Look at what's happening, and the videos of people keeling over in the street. No one falls that way.
yeah,
We know that, right? So there's someone that these aren't random things from the universe. Somebody was behind that. Who the hell was behind? You're 1,000% right.
yeah,
Completely
exactly. And
agree.
and believe it or not, it's happening again. I just the last couple of days in the British press and floating around on Twitter, there have been new pictures of people in China burning bodies in the streets.
Yes,
You
yes,
know, and
yes,
and
yes.
and, and we're at the point now where these photos can be can be rolled out again, and people are just going to nod and say, "Oh yes." Yes, the dead are, overflowing out of windows in Chinese hospitals, and they're burning the dead in the streets. And, um, you
Well, do
know,
you remember the Ganges photos too? Like,
yeah,
remember
yeah,
that? Like, in India, they had all these bodies, stacked up by the Ganges River, and they were doing the kind of, religious rituals around whatever they
yep,
do with the bodies in India. And the media just printed them like they were true. And then
yeah,
a first-year journalism student would have discovered that the Ganges in those areas frequently looks that way
yeah,
because that's how they get rid of their dead, whether they've died of COVID, a cold, or a hangnail, right? Like that's just what they do. But
exactly.
it was never corrected. And then there was also the one in like Potter's Field in New York, and
Hmm.
the refrigerator trucks. Was that real? Like if I
Did,
had the
did,
time and the money, I would just do that.
well, did we talk about that? Because I actually dug into that. I
Which
forgot if we
one?
the death trucks.
So tell me all about the refrigerator trucks. What the hey?
Sure. The death trucks. This was one of my favorite parts of the Orwellian propaganda that was rolled out during the height of the shock and awe campaign, and it was coming out of New York basically, and the death trucks. There were semi trucks, and they're loaded with corpses, and there were photos of forklifts loading the dead bodies into the death trucks.
Yeah.
And so on, and I looked at this and I thought, wait, what is going on? And so I did a little digging around, found a couple of different articles where actual reporters, had interviewed the funeral home owners and the funeral home staff. And they basically explained, what was happening is, a hospital morgue is not built, to hold an unlimited amount of bodies, right? In the normal cycle of life, what happens is people die in the hospital, families make arrangements, the funeral home people come, they pick the bodies up, they take them to the funeral homes, they prepare them, they bury them or cremate them or whatever they're going to do. And there's a natural rhythm to this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When everyone was locked down and freaked out and terrified, the funeral homes were not operating. Families, funeral homes were unable to pick up the bodies. Families were unable to schedule funerals,
Right.
and so on. So what
So
happened?
they
What
piled up.
happened? Yes, what happened was the normal rhythm of what happens when
Yeah.
people die in hospitals was
Yeah.
completely disrupted, and so the bodies had nowhere to go. So
Wow.
of course they went into trucks, right? And this is a perfect example of the gaslighting that has been conducted. Yes, there were actual bodies. Yes, there were actual trucks. Bodies went into the actual trucks. It was presented to us as if so many people were dying, people were
Yeah.
just dropping like flies,
Yep.
that we needed trucks, to house all of the people. And of course, that's not what it was at all.
And what's interesting about what you just said is really kind of the crux of the issue, right? Because any journalist worth their paycheck would have asked, "Oh, is this normal? Like, why is this happening?" And they would have said what you just said. And they would not have run it as some big COVID scare story, which is what they did, right? Like it was an absolute
Yeah.
failure of journalism. And for the propagandist, it's now like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Whatever they tell the media and however they frame it contextually is what the media does. And they should be ashamed because if I remember correctly, those refrigerator trucks were very, very near to the time that they sent that they shut down the emergency tent hospitals and sent that ship away that Trump had sent in there. So this does not compute. You've got all these people sick and dying, but they're not sick and dying in the hospitals that they set up. They didn't need those. But the
Yes.
morgues can't. Like it's just, a 6-year-old could figure it out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to give you credit for getting it right, but a 6-year-old could have figured it out back in the day,
Well,
right?
well, I didn't get it right. The reporters, the New York reporters who actually wrote the stories, are the ones that
Yeah.
got it right. I just found their stories,
Yeah.
and of course, their stories were buried on page 17.
Right.
You
Right. Right.
know, it's there are just so many examples of this. Trish, it's just way too many. I mean, the faked photos that came out of Italy, during the first wave of the shock and awe campaign. Here in Germany, our completely batshit fascist, crazy health minister, Karl Lauterbach, has recently, he was screaming again about, hospitals, overflowing and the hospital capacity, blah. And you go and, it's Germany. So everything is, cataloged and logged and, all
Yeah.
documented and what have you. And it's very simple. You go to the Robert Koch Institute and you check the hospital capacity and it's at 61%. you know
Yeah.
and this is the minister of health of Germany who's getting up and just lying, just blatantly lying to people. And he's doing it because he's pointing at one hospital and or two
Yeah.
hospitals that are
Well, they do
operating
that
at,
here too. They do in
yeah,
Toronto, in Ontario, they do the same thing. They're always, "Oh, we're overwhelmed." We're
yeah,
overwhelmed every year. We play
yeah,
a game here. When they do that, you can type into Google search, "Hospitals overwhelmed Toronto 2016."
yeah,
Boom. Hospitals running at 120%. Hallway medicine reappears every year, right? But since COVID, it's been a reason to shut down the world.
yeah, yeah.
That's how they use it now, and none of these, excuse me for just having a very short rant, none of the hospital administrators who can't seem to figure out that they're gonna be overwhelmed every year and need to create new beds ever get in trouble, right? It's always our fault. It's the
Yeah.
sick people's fault, right? It's the taxpayers' fault. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, in Germany, they've been cutting the beds for a number of years, reducing the number of beds in hospitals. The thing you described it as and I'm not trying to jump on you. You just described it as a failure of journalism, which it is, of course.
Yeah.
But I don't describe it as a failure of journalism anymore, because I'm really trying to focus attention. Those journalists who are quote unquote failing are actually not failing at all. They are parts of this massive global propaganda apparatus, and
Yeah.
they are performing their functions within that machine perfectly. They're doing exactly what the machine wants them to do, expects them to do, and will reward them for doing. And no
Yeah.
one has to send these people a memo. Nobody has to come and say, hey, let's do the fake photos of blah blah. No one has to do this. They're smart. They know, they can sense what the machine wants, and
Yeah.
they know what to feed it, and they know what they'll be rewarded for feeding it.
Yeah.
It's that is what we're up against. I harp on this because I'm just seeing more and more people talking about the mistakes that were made, and the errors, and people describing who was right and who was wrong. And for 3 years I've been trying to stress this point. This was not a debate. This was not an argument over who was
Yeah.
right and who was wrong. you know this was a fight. It has been the rollout of this pathologized version of totalitarianism, or whatever you want to call it, and those of us pushing back against that rollout. you know we haven't been pushing back because we were correct and they were in error. They have been inundating us with propaganda and lies. Let's call them what they are.
Yeah.
They're
Lies,
lies.
lies. Yeah, lies, lies. Well, we saw that with the trucker convoy here, who I probably talk about way too much, but I'm never going to stop. And they had this beautiful, moving, massively Canadian event in Ottawa, peaceful, no trouble, and the lies told, and then the lies debunked later. Nobody is being punished, and the media stepped right up to help them craft the lies, to push the lies, and in fact, under oath, people were saying, "Well," the officials were saying, "Well, we know it's true because we read it in the media." So they created this loop of bullshit about the truckers. None of the bad things they said turned out to be true. None of them, and yet Trudeau got away with the Emergencies Act. He got away with smearing them through and through. Tamara is still waiting for her case to be adjudicated. People's lives were ruined. And I think even worse, what happened is the idea that the crushing of the convoy and the way it was done was a hope killer for all of us. It was, the convoy is the first thing that made me happy in 2 years or a year and a half, whenever they came down the pike. And I got to know Tamara and Chris a bit and liked them both, believe what they were doing. And the crushing of them in that way, this closing of the bank accounts, the threatening of the little people who'd given, imagine Canadians giving $50 and feeling like they were going to lose their house. I
Yeah.
mean, it was just disgusting. And that to me was kind of the beginning of my psychological downward slide, right? That they got away with that they're going to get away with it through the Emergencies Act hearings. I mean, yeah, they were showed up for being fools, but you know what? The legacy media didn't really grab onto it the way they should.
Yeah.
So civil disobedience, no matter how well executed, unless you're Black Lives Matter, for whom our prime minister took a knee, even though they were burning down American cities and killing people, civil disobedience of the right kind is not permitted because it flies in the face of what you call Globocap and the narrative and stuff. And that was really hard to see the full power of the state rise up and be brought down on these people with very, very little, if any, questioning of that by the mainstream media, the legacy media. It was very difficult for me.
I I understand, and at the same time, I have a different perspective on it. I think I was thrilled by the by the occupation in Canada, the trucker protest, and I think the reason that I wasn't as crushed, Trish, maybe as you said you were feeling, is I think what happened in Ottawa was a microcosm of the entirety of the last 3 years. I think, again, going back systemically, part of the point of all of this, and I wrote this back in 2020 in my columns in 2020. The message that that Globocap, the system, this global system that we live under, was sending to everyone, was basically, hey, reality is changing. You've all been living in this reality where you have all of these constitutional rights and freedoms and democrat, and that that's changing, right? That's changing, and
Yeah.
we're moving towards a different reality now. And in this reality, you will shut up and you will vote for who we tell you to vote for, and you will believe whatever we tell you to believe, or we
Yeah.
will crush you,
Yeah.
and what I have been pushing for and struggling for, and I'm still pushing for, is to make the reality of that manifest, so that people can see it, so that people can understand this is what's happening. This is not a story about an apocalyptic pandemic. This is a story about a globally hegemonic system radically restructuring society, and radically restructuring society along totalitarian lines. What happened in Ottawa was a perfect microcosm of the whole thing. I bless the truckers and the protesters and everybody who came out, because they manifested the popular resistance to the insanity of the new normal. They came
Yes.
out and they came out and said, "Hey, this new reality you're imposing on everyone is bullshit." And we're here with our families and our kids, peacefully calling for an end to it, like one does in a democracy. And Trudeau responded like, and this is the thing that is still amazing to me, just classic, fascist,
Yeah.
totalitarian response. you know it rolled out the goon squads, ran over people with horses,
Yeah.
as you just said, hunted down anyone who gave $25 to the protesters and tried to ruin their lives, financially, froze their bank accounts. It's if people don't recognize this as a new form of totalitarianism, I don't know what to show them anymore.
Well, and he survived it politically, right? That's the thing. It's not just that he did it, but he survived it with the rampant support of legacy media. I mean, he is a disgusting human being, as is Chrystia Freeland. Both of them are disgusting human beings. And but I think this also shows us that this is not a problem that's going to be solved politically, because even though there is political pushback now in the form of Pierre Poilievre, Pierre Poilievre is all in for the war in Ukraine. So it's like, do you guys not get it? Like, we don't want you to go to the WEF. We don't want you to take money away from our poor people and give it to a corrupt government in Ukraine because America decides that it wants Putin out. We don't want that anymore. And what's interesting about that used to be Canada's position. We were very much on the sidelines of a lot of this crazy American regime change stuff. We weren't in Iraq. And we've kind of been, maybe I'm a bit naive, but the peacekeepers, that was kind of proudly our role. But now we've been just kind of rolled over by this ridiculous kind of virtue signaling. Here's the latest thing, and it's Ukraine, and the flag goes up in the Twitter bio, and away we go. I mean, it's just, and you can't talk about anything else. If you say, I don't think we should be in Ukraine, oh, you're a Putin supporter. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. But just getting back to the truckers, yeah, that was the low point for me. And I still haven't recovered. I had friends calling me saying, am I on the list? Is there, because someone doxed also the donor list, right? Some
Yeah.
shock jock fool in Toronto who I've known for a very long time. And I can't even believe he's got a fucking audience, but he does. Pardon my French. And so people were calling me saying, do you think like my name is in there, and am I going to get fired? Am I going to lose my house? And it's like, wow, boy, if you want to crush a movement, that's how you do it. They think they're doing something perfectly legal, which they were. And then they're told by every mechanism of the state to be frightened and worry. And we saw Tamara being taken away in handcuffs behind your back and stuff like that. I think they should have done a Bobby Sands type hunger strike, but that's just me. Maybe
Well,
people will do hunger strikes in the future. I could be talked into it if somebody said there's a bunch of us and we're going to do it and it'll get publicity, I would think about risking my life in a hunger strike to to shut this down, right? But it wouldn't be covered the way Bobby Sands was covered, would it?
No, no. The the thing the thing is, I wasn't as I wasn't as crushed by what happened in Ottawa because I fully expected it
Yeah.
to
I
happen.
didn't. I didn't
And
actually. I didn't. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I didn't.
I go back to this. If you brought up hope in the beginning, and
Yeah.
I can't envision the alternative to this globally hegemonic system that I'm talking about. But if there is hope, and I've been advocating this for a while, it as Orwell said, it lies with the proles. It it it
Yeah.
it 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 will come from civil disobedience, like what happened in Ottawa. And I consider what happened in Ottawa actually a success. And what we need is a lot more of it. If you go back, it's classic nonviolent civil disobedience. If you go back to the
Yeah.
civil rights movement in the United States, when the civil rights movement began, and people marched, and the police in Alabama and Mississippi beat the hell out of them, and blew them up, and blew up their churches, and brutalized the hell out of them, and they kept going, and they kept coming. There was not an expectation of, okay, we're going to have a march and everyone's going to see the light and they're going to change the system. It was years and years of nonviolent civil disobedience, and taking the beatings and publicizing the
Yeah.
beatings.
Yeah.
And the strategy behind this is actually based on on a fundamental faith in humanity. The strategy
Yes.
behind this is you
Yes.
just the is the belief that the majority of the people that I call new normals, the majority of people that are going along nodding heads, wearing their masks, and getting multiple vaccinated and waving their Ukrainian flags, you know the majority of these people are not fanatical fascists. The majority of them are confused and scared, and they're going along with whatever the power system tells them to go along with out of self-preservation. If you keep showing these people pictures of decent, nonviolent people standing up and trying to affirm their rights, and forcing fascists like Trudeau, forcing these fascists to show themselves as fascists, to drop the mask of, oh gosh, we're so concerned about the public health, forcing them to be what they are and to show themselves as what they are. This is how civil disobedience works, because eventually those decent people who are just going along to get along, eventually these people start to feel really horrible about collaborating with this vicious fascist machine that is doing this to people. But the only way to put them in the position to pressure them to face that is to force the machine to show itself as what it is. And that means stop arguing about who was right and who was wrong about the virus and blah blah blah, and start focusing on this totalitarianization of society that we're experiencing, because that's what it is, and we saw it in Ottawa.
That's really interesting. One of the early Irish hunger strikers, and I don't mean of the Bobby Sands era, but going way back, the original hunger strikers used the line that the person who wins isn't the person who metes out the pain, but the person who can endure the most pain, right? So it doesn't matter how much you give, as long as you can take more than they can give you, then you win, right? That was the idea about the hunger striking. And it worked in a sense, because some people, it's arguable, but some people do say the death of Bobby Sands and the hunger strike, there were other hunger strikers who died after him who got much less attention, but that they did in a way pave a path for some kind of a nonviolent reconciliation later on, which was pretty interesting. And it's because at the end of the day, if somebody's willing to die that way for what they believe in a purely nonviolent way, there's not very much you can say about it, right? Like it's pretty hard to propagandize, the death of somebody who's prepared to die and, as they would say, lay down their life for their brothers and sisters in that cause. I didn't happen to agree with that cause. It was too violent for me, what they did and what those guys were in Long Kesh for in the Maze prison. But the idea of this kind of silent, hidden hunger strike or death as a way to end that era, it has some appeal to me. People are going to hate me for saying that, but I don't care.
Well, that
Um,
was, Sands was in prison, and that was the only,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
the only tactics he had available
yeah,
to him. We're not in prison yet. You know, most of us are not in prison. Just like the truckers and the protesters in Ottawa were not in prison. And what I'm talking about is the thing that has to be shattered, Trish, if we're going to derail this thing at all, even minimally, the thing that has to be shattered is this illusion, this facade, that what the last 3 years were about was, whether the quote unquote response to the pandemic was correct or incorrect, or it, this is what needs to be shattered, and what we need to shine light on is the totalitarianization of society. And I believe that the way that we ultimately shine light on that, I mean, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what a lot of people are doing in terms of publicizing and writing and saying things is great, but ultimately it's people standing up nonviolently,
yeah,
and forcing these fascist forces, and I'm calling them fascist, forcing these fascists to drop their mask of I'm trying to protect the
of
public health.
benevolence. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
their
yeah,
mask of benevolence. Thank you.
yeah,
To drop the mask of benevolence and to openly behave like the fascists they are,
yeah.
until we can make the actual conflict apparent. We're fighting with dream figures. We're fighting with ghosts. We don't even know what the battle is, right?
That is
the
true.
the
That is true.
the
Yeah, that is
what
true.
has to be made apparent is what we are actually up against.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about some of your writings, because we might be on different sides of Twittergate, right? Like you have, as usual, a complex take on something that I thought I was so happy about it, but shouldn't I be happy about the fact that they let journos in to comb through what was actually happening at Twitter, or is there like a larger picture we need to be looking at, or what the heck?
Both. Yeah, both. What I've tried to do in my writing, and I know I pissed a lot of people off, and lost lost a lot of subscribers and alienated a bunch of readers,
Did
and
you lose subscribers over
oh sure,
this?
oh
Oh, I
sure,
didn't
sure.
know that. Oh, people,
This
people, people. Come on. That's
this
why
and
we
the
love
it
CJ. You gotta, yeah.
It's fine. It goes with the territory. This and the Dismet stuff, but Twitter files. What I've been trying to put forward is that the Twitter files are incredibly important, incredibly significant. This is a huge story. The stuff that Matt's been putting out, just documenting documenting the collaboration between every intelligence agency in the United States and
Yeah.
all of the social media platforms. I mean, Matt has been documenting the management of reality. Just
Yeah.
the
And you're
the
friends with Matt. You mean Matt Taibbi, and you guys are friends, right?
yeah, look, yeah, yeah. I don't. We're colleagues at least, and acquaintances, and yeah, I know Matt, and we communicate sometimes,
Yeah.
and what Matt is. Of course, Matt jumped all over the story. Any journalist, if I was in Matt's position, I would have leaped at this story.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. And I think that all of the journalists who are reporting the Twitter files, I don't question their motives one bit. They are jumping all over the story that is there to report, and it is a huge, monumental story. It is the documentation of what so many of folks on our side have been saying for years and years and years, without the documentation. And now we've got the documentation, and Matt and the other journalists are putting it out there. So this is fantastic, and this is monumental, and it's huge, and it's also a limited hangout, right?
So
Because
explain what that limited hangout means, please.
again, the story that is rolling out, if you just take a look at I'll save the COVID Twitter files for after.
Yeah.
But the story that's being rolled out is a story of the government agencies who were over aggressive, and they were pressuring this poor global internet company, Twitter, to do all of this censoring and so on and so forth. And we're getting the story without the context,
Right.
right? We're getting a story of bad apples, and it's getting focused. And this is really not through any fault of Matt or any of the other journalists. Okay, they are reporting the story that is there for them to report, with the materials that they have to report with, but it's getting focused on oh God, what's the guy's name?
David Swag? Oh, you
No,
mean
it's
the
Yoel something or other,
Yoel
from.
Roth, Yoel Roth,
There
Yoel
you
Roth.
go. Right.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yoel Roth is becoming the evil demon of the story, and you know we're getting a story of bad apples.
Yeah.
I analogize it. If you go back to the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq and Abu Ghraib, when those
Yes.
pictures rolled out,
Yeah.
and oh gosh, and suddenly it was these, this gang of bad apples, who were torching everything, and and that's the limited hangout, and the hangout is to keep us from digging into the larger systemic story.
Yeah.
It's not just a US story. The stuff that Matt and the others are reporting on, they're reporting on the U.S. stuff. They're American reporters, and they're in the
Yeah.
U.S., and that's what they're reporting on. But what's getting lost is the fact that this operation, all of this visibility filtering, this suspending, this censorship, this management of everything that we see on the internet, this happened globally, and this is
Yeah.
still happening. It is happening today. This is not an aberrational event that happened in 2020 and 2021 and is all over. If you go and look at the popular discussion of the Twitter files, all of it, most of it is in the preterite. People speak of it in the past tense.
Yeah.
Back in the bad pre-Elon Musk Twitter days, this horrible stuff happened. The government was doing this and that, and bad Twitter was doing so. And Trish, what this is, the Twitter files, it's a door. It could be a door into understanding how virtually everything that we see on our screens, virtually everything that we see on our screens is managed, is manipulated, is, to use
Yeah.
Twitter's term, quote unquote, visibility filtered.
Ugh. Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
and this is not just something that happened, 2 years ago in San Francisco in bad Twitter. It is happening in Germany. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in France. It's happening in Italy. It's happening all over the world. And it is not just happening because of a bunch of woke FBI agents and a bunch of woke bad apples at the quote unquote old Twitter corporation. This is what makes it a limited hangout. To get into the COVID files, that's that's where I'm not really that critical of the stuff that Matt and the others are doing regarding
Mm.
the Hunter Biden laptop story and the Trump stuff. I think they're doing a great job on that,
Yeah.
and that's fine. That is a
But the COVID
U.S.
stuff,
story.
you as a U.S. server, the COVID spot, it's interesting you said it because the COVID files are kind of special, right? And I was at one point a few weeks ago in touch with somebody who was quite close to Elon, and I said, make sure he gets someone in there who knows what the hell they're doing, because even some of these great reporters like Matt and Barry and some of the other ones who are terrific on some topics, they don't get COVID. Like, they've all made big mistakes on COVID, right? It's like it's hard to find the hybrid person to go through the files and really separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And so I was concerned about them. And I know some of the people who were censored, and I think it's terrible because it hid the fact that there was no consensus on lockdowns, obviously. But anyway, go ahead. I interrupted you. Sorry. I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, I mentioned that as well. And again, I love Matt to death and absolutely respect
Me too.
him as a journalist. But I
Yeah.
mentioned it in one of my columns is Matt, Matt interviewed me during the height of the, new normal hysteria, and kudos. Um, uh, but, neither Matt nor Barry, or Schellenberg, as far as I know, none of these people were chomping at the bit to dig into the story that I've been talking about and that I've been writing about for 3 years, which is the rollout of this pathologized totalitarianism, which I think I have documented.
Yeah.
And fair enough. Let them cover the stuff that they're inclined to cover. They got David Zweig, I think is his name, who's the
Swag.
writer for the
Yeah.
Atlantic, Zweig,
Yeah.
to start doing the COVID file stuff. And again, I don't mean to shit on David Zweig, but if you look at his journalism, he's kind of been pushing back on the official COVID narrative, in a limited sort of way that is not going to get him kicked out of the quote unquote respectable journalist club, where you can get published at places like the Atlantic and what have you. Um, leaving the COVID story, leaving the COVID censorship story, the COVID official narrative enforcement story
Yeah.
in the hands of journalists who are not willing to go the whole hog and go back and start with things like that fake staged photograph
Yeah.
of the people dropping dead in China, the fake 3.4% death rate that was rolled out,
Yeah.
that 157 tweet thread that I documented in March and April. People who are not willing to take that step over the line and analyze what happened and what has happened and what is still happening.
Yeah.
In the context that actually exists. What we're going to end up with is the story of people who got carried away and censored people because they were afraid it was going to get people killed. And it's both, Trish, is the short answer. These are both the Twitter files monumental stories, and so far at least turning out to be the mother of all limited hangouts.
Yeah. Meaning it's not that it's a corrupted process, right? That's what that means, that people can't. Yeah.
No, for people who don't understand what a limited hangout is, it's an old psychological operations term. What you do when you can't hide the stuff that you're trying to hide anymore. If you're the CIA or intelligence community, whoever you are, when you're and PR agencies use this, corporations use it, for public relations purposes as well. It's not just in intelligence agencies. When you can't hide the facts and the story that you've been trying to hide anymore, what you do is you do a limited hangout. You take a selected part of the story, and it's real. There's nothing fake about it. You take a selected part of the story that you think you can survive, and you release that. That's the hangout. You hang that part out. And everybody goes, whoa, whoa, oh, and, we got the truth and what have it. And by
Yeah.
doing that, you're able to withhold and conceal the more important parts of the story that you cannot let be exposed.
This is like the new JFK document release is what's ringing around my head right now as you describe that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I put a tweet out recently just because I'm a provocateur, and I said they're admitting. I said so they're admitting that the CIA killed JFK and that the FBI was working with Twitter to censor everybody. I forget what I said in the tweet. I said they're hanging this stuff out. If this is the limited hangout, what is it? What is
Yeah.
it that they're trying to distract you from?
What are they hiding? Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
because a limited hangout is meant to distract you from the larger story. And
Yeah.
the question
Yeah.
I asked was, what's the larger story that they're trying to distract you from with this limited hangout?
Well, it's
So
so
it's
funny
both.
because Tucker Carlson's the only person in the mainstream media who's really gone after. He said, I actually called a friend who was in the CIA and said, did you kill Kennedy? Like he's actually doing what people used to do. It was so funny. I really
Yeah.
liked it. It was
Yeah.
terrific. Good. Go, Tucker. Go. It was quite fun. Yeah. So I think my last little bit I want to do with you before we say goodbye is just that I'm interested in Matthias Desmond. I had him on the show. And here's why I was interested in Matthias and what he was saying, because I was seeing in people I knew and loved a kind of mass hypnosis that was coloring their ability to intake data and information that was not in line with their confirmation bias. In other words, I was seeing a kind of a cult-like mental illness. So when he said that mass formation, like, okay, there we go, waiting for that. That's the answer. That kind of, so I was surprised that you have a kind of a less favorable attitude toward the research he did. What's going on there with you?
That's putting it kindly, Trish. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
My my fundamental and I'm going to go ahead and say it again, and then I'll get flooded. Every time I mention Matthias Desmond, I get just flooded with hysterical emails
Okay.
from his fans, and then I get flooded with waves of phishing attacks and so
Wow.
on. But
Okay.
I'll go ahead and say it again. It's actually pretty simple. What what Desmet does with his theory essentially is the same thing that I was just talking about, the same thing that the powers that be are doing, only differently, is he's pathologizing what is a political phenomenon. When I've been analyzing the last 3 years as the rollout of this new pathologized form of totalitarianism, which has nothing to do with any underlying, emotional or psychological imbalance in society. I referenced the Milgram experiments in the introduction to my book. It's
Yeah.
totalitarianism doesn't come from a sick or imbalanced society. Any society can be transformed into a totalitarian society if the people in power have the will and the means to do it. And I think I've documented that process over the last 2+ years.
Yeah.
I did it month by month in my book. People can read the documentation if they want. I don't think anyone was hypnotized. I don't think people in cults are hypnotized. What happens when totalitarianism is rolled out. The powers that be say, here's the new reality, folks. And again, people can go back and look at my 157 tweet thread, and see when it was actually rolled out.
Yeah.
The powers that be announce the new reality, and they say, okay, look, this is what you're going to believe And also you're going to stay inside under house arrest, and you're not going to go out without permission papers. And if we order you to put a mask on your face, you're going to put a mask on your face, even though we told you the day before yesterday that masks don't work against viruses. And basically you're going to do whatever we tell you to do, and believe whatever we tell you to believe, and perform whatever ridiculous rituals we tell you to perform, or we're going to punish you. We're going to punish you with policemen. They're going to beat you up and arrest you. We're going to destroy your income and your family. We're going to get you fired from your job. We're going to financially destroy you. We're going to make sure that you never work again as a respectable journalist. On and on and on. The powers that be came out and announced reality is changing. And those who don't get on board with it are going to suffer severe consequences. And the vast majority of people, Trish, when the powers that be come out and announce that, and again, I'm honestly not judging these people. These are people with families, with jobs, so their kids depend on them, people with careers. Most people are going to conform. They're going to conform so that they don't get punished and so that their lives don't get ruined. And they're going to conform at first because they're terrified, because the propaganda is terrifying. And they're going to keep conforming because the message is going to keep coming at them. And the more they conform and the longer they conform, the tougher the cognitive dissonance gets.
Yes, it is cognitive dissonance. There's no question about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and at a certain point, they're going to force themselves to tell themselves that they actually believe what they're saying, what they need to believe.
But see, I don't think that's all that different than what he was saying. And here's why I say that, because, and I'm not defending him in particularly, but one of the things he said was that our society right now, and when COVID hit and when this huge onslaught of propaganda hit us all, that we were living pretty disconnected, crappy lives, right? And I believe that's true. I think we were really vulnerable for something to believe in. And part of his mass formation psychosis theory, I believe he said that people are vulnerable to it when they want to have a higher purpose and there's nothing available. So they kind of sign on psychiatrically to the propaganda and let that rule their lives, because they can say, look, I'm being a good American or a good Canadian or whatever, right? So I think that's part of what he was saying too. I don't think you guys are that far apart, but
Well, we are actually because
I'm trying to do some
because
peacemaking here, CJ.
because
I'm trying to do
because poof, what you just described,
yeah.
poof, totalitarianism disappeared. And what you were describing was this psychological or emotional imbalance in society
Yeah.
that was there. And
Yeah.
Trish, I'm sorry, but I read enough history and I'm old enough, and it's
Yeah.
just
Yep. I get it.
it's just he proposes this when you propose this society that is disconnected and alienated and doesn't have a purpose and is faced with meaninglessness and whatever the other four pillars are that
Yeah.
are in his book.
Yes.
When you propose this society as the root of the problem, or the thing that makes society vulnerable to totalitarianism,
Yeah.
to me it's just silly. It's every society every society throughout history can be described this way.
Yeah.
When you do this, you automatically kind of create this fictional ideal society where people are not alienated and where everyone's life is meaningful, and this is it's a fiction. It's not real life. Trish, it's like this idea that a lot of us have of being a healthy person. I'm going to be an emotionally healthy person. There's no such fucking thing. we all struggle with everything that we struggle with. It's not by accident. It's life.
Yeah.
It's life. And it's just like all these people that, have collaborated with the new totalitarianism. There's nothing wrong with these people. Actually, a point that I've made is that, these people are following their survival instincts.
Yes.
They're actually the people that are liable to survive. It's us. It's
Yes.
us who
Yes.
stand
Yes.
up and shout and push back. We're the ones that get lined up against the wall and shot.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, even if we disagree about Matthias, and I'm going to rethink, but I do feel people have been captured, and I feel they've been captured because of conversations I've had where I can see like that information is not, that does not compute, and the blinking eyes, and what do you mean, like it's like they can't accept a fact that contradicts something they believe very strongly. So that feels like a kind of psychiatric capture to me for whatever reason, they reject it. It's actually it's a physiological. I see it in people. Like I have, like one of my kids used to do that when I tried to, excuse me, to talk about why I was skeptical of a vaccine with a truncated testing history, and it was just like bat the eyelash. What, mom? That doesn't compute. You're a weirdo. Okay, I'm a weirdo.
Trish, I understand completely. Keep in mind, you're talking to the guy that coined the, term the Covidian cult, right? When I wrote
Yes,
that
you
piece,
did. Yes, and
I
I
wrote that
completely
piece
agree
back
with it. Yeah.
in 2020, and I
Yeah.
understand how cults work, and and what you're describing is absolutely correct, and I've described it in my essays as well. It's just my point is that phenomenon, is not the result of some emotional or psychological imbalance in people or in
Yes.
society. That is the result of being captured inside of a social body, a social organism. A cult is a
Yeah.
small social organism, and global society is a large one. It's
Yeah.
the result of being captured in a social organism, the rules of which are such that you have to behave that way. These are people who are conforming to the rules of a new reality that is being rolled out, and that has been rolled out over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's us who are refusing to convert to the new reality. We are the exceptions.
We are the exceptions. Yeah.
We're the deviants.
Yeah. How is Catherine doing?
As far as I know, she's doing incredibly well. She's
Good.
just
Love her.
indefatigable, and invincible. She just marches on, as far as I know.
I know. I want to be her. I want to be her. She sent
So
me
do
the
I.
right? She sent me the Wim Hof book when I had a little bit of long COVID after my last COVID. I was just really wheezed out. And she said, "No, you got to take ice baths. I'm sending this guy's book. Maybe I'll have Wim on the show. That would be sort of fun." But yeah. So, and I am going to try to get Tim Robbins. I'm glad you mentioned him because I'd forgotten about him, and I'd love to have him on and kind of explore how he got here. It'd be great. Thanks for doing this, friend.
It was wonderful talking to you again. I wanted to do it because it was you. I'm actually trying to cut down on interviews and other projects and what have you, and finally focus on the second novel that I was just getting ready to start in 2020 when all of this happened. So yeah, I'm kind of resetting and reconfiguring. But I'm always yours whenever you want me.
Thanks, my love. And you know what? My husband and I are going to fly over to Berlin at some point in the next year or so and take you guys to dinner. So that would be pretty fun, right?
Yep, do it in the spring or the summer.
Okay, but where should we stay? What's the good place in Berlin to stay?
I'll find you a place.
Okay, brilliant.
I don't know. I don't know any. I
Okay.
don't know anymore, but I'll find one for you.
Thanks, my love. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks
Take
for
care,
doing
Trish.
this. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Bye.
So that was my friend CJ Hopkins, and I really am going to go to Berlin with my husband at some point and have dinner with him, because we're very simpatico, and I admire very much what he's done, and I'd like to say thank you in person. Let me also just give you some reasons to hope, or maybe a reason to hope. Many of you will know that my rescue dog, went missing this week, and she was gone for about, well, she was gone, and I didn't know where she was for about excuse me, for about 7 hours. And I was hysterical, of course. It was so painful. I felt I almost couldn't survive it. Like, isn't it strange the way I reacted? But we spent all of those hours canvassing Midtown Toronto and Rosedale, where I live, going house to house and trying to locate her with a tray of brisket, hoping to lure her out if she was hiding, because that's what rescue dogs do, right? They hide. And so my 2 grown kids, my husband, myself, family, friends, we were all out looking for the dog. And it turned out that she had been turned in due to a number on her collar. I'm not going to get into details of how this happened, but they didn't bother to let me know. She was found. She went missing at 12:30. She was captured running up Yonge Street at 1 o'clock. She had a leash on, and nobody told us. So we had 7 really, 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 really bad hours that I will never. I'll be able to forgive because that's who I am, but I don't understand it. So let's just leave it at that for now. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story also about my dog. So we were out walking my dog yesterday or this morning, and I rounded the corner and I saw a man with a dog, and I could see he was taking a picture of something and then making a phone call. And what I saw was that there was a dead raccoon in the middle of the road. There are jillions of raccoons near here where I live. They're considered vermin, right? Until they're hit by a car and then we feel sorry for them. Aren't we nuts that way? I mean, really. All we do is complain about the raccoons. They spill garbage, they break into places, they're terrible things. And then when one of them's hurt, we collapse, which I think is also an appropriate response. I can't explain it, but it is. Anyway, so this lovely, lovely man, I hope he listens to the show, was calling 311, right? The raccoon had been hit by a car. It wasn't quite dead, which made it worse. I saw its head move and I started to get really upset. I don't know what to do. You don't want them to suffer, but I couldn't really face it. So I saw him on the phone. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm calling Toronto Animal Services to see if they can save it," right? So here is this guy, this kind of middle-aged guy with a dog who could have walked by what appeared to be a dead raccoon and didn't. He's taking time out of his day to stand there guarding over this raccoon in the middle of the road and calling for help. So there are people like that out there. There are. I said to him, and I'm a bit ashamed of this because it's new for me. I said, "Look, I can't stay here and watch this. I gotta keep going, but thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And Chili and I walked on to finish our morning walk. But when I turned around, he was standing there on the phone trying to get help for this raccoon that had been hit by a car and was dying. He didn't want it to die alone. Like, there are really good people out there. We didn't talk about who had a vaccine or didn't, or who approved of lockdowns or didn't. There are amongst us still this bond of really powerful, powerful humanity. And raccoons are a funny thing, aren't they? Because, like I say, we hate it when they're going into our garbage, but we also hate to see them die that way. So, what a lovely guy. I'm sending out really spiritual vibes toward that man who was standing on, I think he was standing on Poplar Plains Road, um, calling for help. So, next week, you're going to get Francis Christian, which is an episode I could listen to over and over again for the rest of my life because he's so spiritual. You will hear the re-education camp segment that he taped, and then you'll fully understand what's happening to Dr. Jordan Peterson. So please do that, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. And this is Trish Wood. Stay critical. See ya.